What makes a good party? I don't even know. I think a lot of people do. I don't know. All I know is, you go to a party, you either have a lot of fun or you don't. I went to one of the best parties of my life the other night in Midtown Manhattan. It kind of made the news. It was a party called A Night for Freedom, put on by Mike Cernovich, Gavin McInnes, Stefan Molyneux, Owen Benjamin. It was really, I think it was kind of Cernovich's party, and the other guys were the entertainment/celebrities. So I'm kind of a hermit, so I don't normally gravitate to these kind of things, but people who watch this channel, people who listen to these podcasts, some people who read my books called me up and they said, Colin, are you going to that? So I wasn't really planning on it. I'm not sure. Anyway, they said, well, just come with us. We'll buy you a ticket. You can come with us. So next thing you know, I said, I'm on my way to New York City with Johnny and Kathy from beautiful Cincinnati, Ohio. Wow, what a weekend. Hi, this is Colin Flaherty. I'm the author of Don't Make the Black Kids Angry. Here we talk about black mob violence, black on white crime, black on old, black on young, black on gay, black on straight, black on Asian, black on Amish, black on turtles, kittens, turtles, and puppies. All wildly out of proportion. But that's only half of it. On this podcast and in my other platforms, books, and videos, we also document the denial, deceit, and delusion surrounding it to create the greatest lie of our generation, the myth of black victimization. That's what we do here. We expose that, the violence and the denial every day. Happy you're here with us. Let's get back to the big party. So much happened there. I mean, okay, so let's just get to the big thing that happened in the news, because I wasn't even kind of wasn't even part of that. I was too busy partying inside. A bunch of Antifa protesters showed up, and some 56-year-old guy walked out of the party, and he was attacked and hurt pretty badly. They arrested a 30-year-old protester. I think he's in jail right now. I'll keep you updated on that as we learn more about the condition of that party goer, as well as this loser who attacked him. Okay, let's start at the beginning, because this was interesting. So I walked in the party with Johnny and Kathy, and everybody was, Gavin and everybody else suggested that everybody dress nicely. No baseball caps or T-shirts or overalls or flip-flops. So everybody looked nice. Everybody had their shower. Everybody looked freshly showered. Some people were wearing new clothes, which reminded me of the famous saying by Henry David Thoreau: "Beware of all enterprises require new clothing." Well, this was not an example of that, because this thing was very interesting. Even though I did have one little bone to pick with the organizers about something that happened during the Q&A, which we're going to talk about at some length because it is quite important. But anyway, so we walk into the hall, and by the way, this was the third location they had secured in a 24-hour period. They walked up, they put a deposit down for one room. That guy canceled on them on the day before the party. They got another location. That guy canceled on them in the morning. Then they got another kind of last minute thing. They got another location, and it worked out real well. I mean, there was a lot of catering involved, right? A lot of catering and drinks and chairs and tables, and a lot of people involved in this. So Cernovich really knows how to throw a good party. And it worked out. It worked out perfectly. Anyway, so I walked in there. It was kind of an empty room. I think we got there a little bit early. I walked in there, and I heard somebody go, "Hey, Colin, how's it going?" I looked over. It was a guy I kind of lost track of, but I enjoyed meeting him when I met him, and I was happy to see him there again. His name was Andrew. He was from the New Yorker magazine. Da 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 da. Now, let's not confuse, even though they work for the same guy. Come to think of it, I'm probably going to go too far here. Let's not confuse Andrew with Evan Osnos. Evan Osnos is the guy who worked for the New Yorker, who said, Colin was a bad person. Colin does all these bad things. Colin makes stuff up. Then he got this guy named Mike King, Professor Mike King. He says, "Oh yeah, I looked all over for these stories, knockout game stories. You know, the ones that Colin has videos of. I couldn't find a single one." Then the article went on to say in some detail how Colin not only made up the knockout game, he somehow hornswoggled Fox News into covering it, and he even got Donald Trump involved. That's the New Yorker magazine, the once mighty New Yorker magazine. It was a fairy tale, beginning to end. Everybody else could take care of the rest of their involvement. I'm just telling you, my own part in that story was a fairy tale, beginning to end. And the New Yorker used to be known for these, really diligent fact checkers, the kind of people who would look at the camera and say, "Well, depends what the meaning of the word is that kind of person." And I am pretty confident that Evan Osno set a record for errors per paragraph in a New York magazine story. So, I was fully aware of the New Yorker when I got a call from Andrew. It was a year or so ago, maybe a little bit more. Andrew was working for the New Yorker, and he said he was doing a story on conservative media outlets and how they're using the new media, and he heard people suggested I was getting a lot of mileage out of my YouTube and my books and my and my articles. So I went up there, but the very first, I went up there and we talked. But here's the thing about reporters. So I was a reporter for a long time. I trained reporters. I lecture to reporters at the University of California, San Diego. I party with reporters in Las Vegas and other places. I know the type, okay? So I don't have any expectation of them to do anything else but get the story that they are after. And I understand the bedside manner that people have, the spoonful of sugar they have to give you before the medicine goes down. I understand all that. And if you understand all that, then at least on the, face-to-face level, you're not going to really have any reason to go look at them and go, "You dirty, no good son of a bitch, you're peddling fake news." Because when I deal with reporters, and I've had I deal with a lot of them, I always remember the famous quote from Janet Malcolm. She wrote a book about Joe McGinnis. He's the guy. He became famous. I think he wrote The Selling of the President in 1968. It was about how Republicans do really bad things during election years. Then he wrote a book, I think it was called Fatal Vision. It was a book about the Green Beret doctor who was convicted of killing his family down in North Carolina. So Joe McGinnis wanted to write a book about the case and his story. And Joe McGinnis basically told him, if you give me access, I'm sympathetic with what you're up to. I mean, we're going to get you off because I don't think you did this. Well, when the book came out, Joe McGinnis had found out lots and lots and lots of stuff that really didn't, it really just confirmed what seemed obvious, that the doctor killed his family. But this went against the agreement Joe McGinnis had, and I think the doctor sued. He actually won some money off McGinnis because, there was a contract. And they brought in Janet Malcolm to testify because she's kind of one of the leading, if not the leading, media critic of our age. So Janet Malcolm's famous quote about journalists that was based on this Fatal Vision story is as follows. "Every journalist who is not too stupid or too full of himself to notice what is going on knows that what he does is morally indefensible. He is a kind of confidence man, preying on people's vanity, ignorance, or loneliness, gaining their trust and betraying them without remorse." Oh, Miss Malcolm's not done yet. She's just getting warmed up. I don't think these quotes are sequential, but they're from the same person talking about the same topic. Then she goes on in another place to talk about a fundamental rule of journalism. You guys all know what my fundamental rule of journal and only rule is. If your mother says she loves you, check it out. But Janet talks about how one of the fundamental rules of journalism is when you find a story, you must stick to it. The narratives of journalism are like the narratives of I'm paraphrasing, are like the narratives of mythology and folklore. They derive their power from their firm, undeviating sympathies and antipathies, period. Cinderella must remain good and the stepsisters bad because second stepsister not so bad after all is not a good story, says Janet Malcolm. And so I was fully aware of all that when I met this guy from the New Yorker magazine. And we had a nice talk. Within 10 or 15 minutes of him, I said, listen, you ought to know this. I mean, you probably don't even know that Evan Osnos is a jerk. And you probably don't know that he made an enormous amount of mistakes when he said some really nasty things about good old Colin. And I had a letter that I had sent to the publisher of their magazine calling BS on Evan and on him. I said, here it is. Here's the details of why that thing was just ridiculously wrong. And so, it was out in the open. It was all good. And we had a nice conversation. We tried to get to lunch at some little, at some little dive. Apparently dives are very popular near the New Yorker office building. So after we couldn't get into the dive, Andrew said, well, let's go up to my office. We have a cafeteria up there. So we go up to the office. I'm just kind of looking around. It's a very nice building. It looks new. And we get to the 40th floor of their suite. There's a cafeteria there. The cafeteria has the most unbelievable panoramic view of New York you could possibly imagine. So good old Colin, the rube from the small town in Kansas is in New York looking out the window. I go, wow, this is a great view. The World Trade Center must be around here somewhere. Where is it? He goes, no, you're in it. Okay, so anyway, but it was great to be up there in the belly of the beast to see what their whole operation was like. And when I ran into Andrew, the same guy at Cernovich's party, I didn't inquire, but he said he never got around to doing the story for one reason or another. I put my hand up and said, listen, the story either writes itself or it doesn't. I mean, I don't require reporters to come and tell me why they do or don't write a story. And so anyway, but he was there because he had his notebook out. He was scratching away because I think he's taking the story he was working on then and blowing it up into a book, something about big bad right wingers doing big bad things, and blah blah blah. The importance of magazines like the New Yorker is not that they have 87 million people reading them. The importance of the New Yorker is that the people who run the media, who run the TV stations, who run the newspapers, who run the universities, who train the reporters, they read the New Yorker. And so they pick up attitude, they pick up tone, they pick up point of view from there, and they might not be as important as the New York Times, but all these things kind of reinforce each other's worldview. So for its size, the New Yorker definitely punches above its weight. But even so, I was happy to meet him. I was happy to see him the other night. I'm very interested in what reporters do. I know a lot of reporters. I'm interested in how these news stories get made, who the people are making the news stories. If you don't know any reporters, you basically, they're very good. The publications and the platforms are very good by kind of surrounding their reporters with this sheen of credibility and invincibility that once you meet them in person, it's like, oh, you know what? They're not that. They're just a regular old person with a notepad. Same with TV people. If you see them on TV, you think that they come down from Mount Olympus every day at 5:00 to deliver us a message from the gods. Then they return to Mount Olympus. But when you see them in person, when you party with them, when you realize who they are, when you talk to them, and you find out they're not just average, but in many cases below average people with a good voice and a good set of acting chops, then you realize that lots and lots of people in the TV business, they're basically just one version of a person who went to Radio Shack and got a cheap camera and a transmitter and hooked it up somewhere. That's your average TV reporter and TV executive. So I had a good time talking to Andrew, and I think I don't know if we were jibing each other or not. I don't think so, but I actually just sat down. I looked over, and there he was. I didn't even plan on sitting next to him, but there he was. But even just as interesting, sitting next to him, I thought it was like his intern or something. A younger guy was listening to when Andrew and I were talking. It was a guy from the Atlantic magazine. Same drill as the New Yorker, same audience, same kind of approach, same kind of veneer of credibility and invincibility they build around themselves in order to make you think that everything they write is received wisdom from the powers that be. When you see them in person, they're just regular old people that you might not listen to if you heard them talking behind you in a line at a movie theater. Anyway, if I were an author of any talent whatsoever, I would have been seeking these guys out, tracking them down, calling them up. I'm on, say I'm going to be in New York. Why don't we meet? And I can tell you the full story on black criminality wildly out of proportion and how idiots like you are in total denial, deceit, and delusion about it. Well, I've actually had that conversation with people from the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC. For some reason, they never get around to writing a story about how they're big fat jerks and they don't know anything at all about what they're up to. And they're a part of the problem, not the solution. I don't know why they don't do those stories. They just don't. That's why it's so important to have our own platform here. We don't have to worry about any filters. But anyway, the guy next to Andrew, he was listening. I just thought he was like, I thought they were all together. It looked like a crew. There was a young guy, and there was a young lady sitting next to him. I thought they were all with Andrew because they were all listening very intently when Andrew and I were sitting there talking to each other. We were sitting just 3 or 4 feet apart. Later on, maybe 20 minutes later, the guy comes up to me. Turns out he's from the Atlantic. And he goes, "Well, hey, you probably think I'm from the Atlantic magazine. You probably you think what we do is fake news." I don't really attach myself to the latest phrases that people use. I don't know if I ever even use the word fake news, but that's what he said. I try to get away from the general. When somebody goes really generalized on me, I try to dive into the specific, so we can kind of like talk about what's real. So I reminded him, I did not expect him to know this. I don't think he did. I said, "Listen, I've been writing and talking about Ta-Nehisi Coates from day one. I've been saying the same thing Cornel West has been talking about for the last few weeks. How he's kind of a con artist, a little bit of a fraud. He's not the great literary second coming of pick your favorite dead writer. He's just your average liberal, narcissistic black writer talking about relentless black victimization, relentless white racism that kept him down in Baltimore. If you want to write a novel about Ta-Nehisi Coates, if you want to write Ta-Nehisi Coates style, I'll tell you how to do it right now. So you write a book about your life, and you write about 10 or 20 paragraphs worth about how when you left your house in Baltimore, your life was one constant struggle with violence and fear. I guess he gets credit for actually acknowledging that when he hit the streets of Baltimore, he was in fear of other fellas who were intent on harming him and his fellas. It's a fact of life in Baltimore. That's why we call that huge chunk of that city a no-go zone. So anyway, Ta-Nehisi Coates, I actually got into a conversation with how they pronounce his name. Ta-Nehisi, yeah. Yeah, I was pronouncing it Ta-Nehisi. I heard people on NPR pronounce it Ta-Nehisi, but the guy from the Atlantic, where Ta-Nehisi Coates, reminded me it's Ta-Nehisi. So we talked about that for a while. But I had this story in my mind about the Atlantic. I said, this is what happens when you go to parties, right? You forget things. And I had just done a couple stories. I did a podcast and I did a story on the Atlantic, which I really enjoyed. Some stories, I don't tell you guys which are my favorites. This was one of my favorite stories from the Atlantic that we did a podcast and a couple of videos on. This was the video, by the way, that got me kicked off of YouTube. You might recall we posted it. We did a podcast on it, and I posted it on my new platform for video, which is minds.com. Go over there at minds.com/Colin Flaherty. All my new videos are there. But the video was, and the podcast was all about how the Atlantic ran this huge story about how white people moving into black neighborhoods causes black crime, and it causes cops to brutalize black people. This went on for a very long time. And they had all the usual suspects in there. You know, the usual, like, well, we're with the, Flatbush Accountability League, and white people moving into black neighborhoods is bad for black people because it causes black people to commit crime, and then the cops come and the cops abuse us. You know, and so that story is like every single story we do on this podcast and on my books and on my minds.com site. Every one, which is, I don't do the story unless something inside of me goes, I would not believe that story if somebody told it to me. Unless I saw the story itself. So somebody said, hey, Colin, you see that story in Atlantic Magazine where they say white people are causing black people to commit crime because their white people are moving into black neighborhoods and that causes black people to commit crime? Do you see that story? I would say, no, I didn't see that. I don't believe that because that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my whole damn life. Well, Colin, did you see the part where white people moving into black neighborhoods causes cops to brutalize black people all the time, everywhere? That explains everything. I would say, no, I don't believe that either. I know the Atlantic is really far down the road with Ta-Nehisi Coates, but that's stupid. Magazines don't write stories like that. That is stupid. Why are you telling me something stupid? So, send me a link. Look at it. Oh my God. There it is. Everything I just told you. I mean, I'm even kind of understating the ridiculous level of what these clowns inside the Atlantic sheltered in their offices, I think in Boston, that's their point of view. So the Atlantic, they call themselves the Venerable Atlantic. Anyway, so I reminded this guy from the Atlantic that, I know all about Ta-Nehisi. I know all about the Atlantic. And he was friendly. He was doing the Janet Malcolm thing. It's all good. I was friendly to him. He was friendly to me. He was there doing a story on the right-wing whack jobs that having parties. And that's basically Andrew's story the same way. They cannot deviate from that story or else it wouldn't be a story or a book for readers of the New Yorker or the Atlantic. They're not interested in stories saying, yeah, there's a lot of people out there. They're really smart. They're interesting. They even have some fun, but they really kind of have our number about how liberals are in denial, deceit, and delusion about some very important things. And that guy, Colin Flaherty, he's at the tip of the spear on this racial crime thing. He's the one speaking the most plainly about it, the most knowledgeably about it. Then they're not going to say that. It's just going to, their coverage is basically going to be, well, those alt-right whack jobs are at it again. And so, that is what it is. We're not going to change them. All we're going to do with them is kind of ignore them or not patronize them too much. But what we really do is we watch them as their audience more and more discovers that lots and lots of what they're saying is just covered over with this tissue of credibility, which is easy to pierce. And when you pierce it, you look there and you say, boy, this is just some kind of bubbling cauldron of confusion, resentment, white guilt, and poor thinking. That's it. That's all they have. And they mix it up. They put it in a nice typeface. They get great graphics. And it looks like they know what the hell they're talking about. But if you just read it and you say to yourself, that's just a guy with a notepad. That's just a guy you're standing behind or in front of in a movie line, and you listen to what he said, you would say, that guy's pretty far gone. I hope he almost kind of sounds like he's a danger to himself and to others, because people who deny the reality of black criminality wildly out of proportion, I mean, they don't have the sense to come in out of the rain. Now, if that's your thing individually, go ahead. You know, that's your thing. Go ahead. If you're going to be one of the people that say, oh, I walk through black neighborhoods all the time, Colin, nobody ever bothers me. If that's the level you're operating on, go ahead. I don't care. That's your life. That's not mine. I'm actually a little more worried about it if you have kids, if you have a spouse, you're in charge of protecting, and you take that and you try to inflict those damaging fairy tales on them, they'll get hurt for that along with you. And I guess I'm even a little more concerned if you take these ridiculous points of view of denial, deceit, and delusion, put them on print, put them on paper, gussy them all up with some nice typeface and some nice headlines and glossy photos on the front with lots of interviews with movie stars. You do that, you're basically doing more damage by getting more people to believe that what you say is true. That what you say about black victimization and white racism is true, when that is part of the biggest lie of our lifetime, the greatest hoax of our generation. And it's the only way it gets that way is because it's the greatest unexamined belief of our generation. I was talking to the guy from the Atlantic. I told him about the story I did, and told him about Ta-Nehisi and what a joke that is, and how he Ta-Nehisi, he kind of makes his living. He's on the speaking tour too. He was at the Aspen Festival of Ideas last summer. And he was there with the mayor of New Orleans. I think his name is Landrieu Mitchell. Is that his name? I forget. Landrieu. He's part of that old political family down there. So this guy, Landrieu, is, very liberal, very down with the cause, a white guy. So they go to the Festival Ideas, and the only thing Ta-Nehisi and Landrieu disagreed on was who was down with the cause more, who really hated white people more, who really wanted to expose the relentless quality of white racism and the relentless quality of black victimization more. We talk about that word relentless. We used it a lot here. I was reading a story at Russia. We did a video over the weekend involving somebody from Al Jazeera, and they were talking about white racism and racial violence directed at black people. They said it was relentless. Yes. So the guy from the Atlantic was trying to convince me that there's a lot of diversity of viewpoints at the Atlantic. I said, listen, I read the Atlantic. I read it. I read the stories about Ta-Nehisi Coates. I scan it. I read it online. I see what's in there. There is no pushback to Ta-Nehisi Coates. None. Nobody's going up there and saying, listen, this black criminality is, it's a thing. It's a black thing. It's a black thing to be in denial, deceit, and delusion about it, even as it keeps growing and growing and growing into neighborhoods where it's never been before. And he started telling me this little fairy tale about, no, Colin, on our website, on our internal website, we have lots of pushback on that. I said, what are you talking? He goes, people, like a lot of people are saying they disagree with that. I said, what are you talking about? That's not public information. Did you post it anywhere that Ta-Nehisi Coates is a fool? A con artist? selling fake medicine oil to a group of willing rubes in places like the Aspen Festival of Ideas, where at the end of the presentation, where basically the presentation is, well, we're going to have a big argument about why white people suck really, really bad, and we're just going to disagree on how badly they really suck. Is it unbelievably bad or really unbelievably bad? Those are the two choices. And when they're done their presentation, everybody from Aspen stands up, gives them a standing ovation. This is literally true. They go back to the airport, get on their private jets, and go home. And that's the last experience they'll have seeing or interacting with a black person on any level until the next summer, where they have the next black person of the year telling them the latest theory of black victimization. Oh, want me to tell you what it is? Yeah, I read this, and I've heard this a couple times, but I read it over the weekend. It was in connection with an article about, it was from the Washington Post. The Washington Post runs, I'm sorry, I can't help but laugh. Can't help but laugh at the level of goofiness of these people who, in their own mind, they're so serious and self-important. But when then they write stuff, it's like, oh no, that's just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard until the next one, which is going to be in about 10 minutes, I'm guessing. They write a big article about kind of disguised as a book review. I think her name's Patrice Cullors. She's one of the founders of Black Lives Matter. She's a self-described queer black woman with self-described history of mental illness and criminality. And she was really kind of pissed that even despite all those things, or maybe even because of all those things, people would not turn over enormous amounts of power and responsibility to her. And she said that was all about racism because she's a black woman with mental illness and she's queer and a history of criminality. And, well, that doesn't seem very fair, according to her. But then the Washington Post, they took what she said and they kind of carried it down, use a football metaphor here. They took another 10 yards down the field. They said, oh yeah, and by the way, people are ignoring her. Because Jesse Williams gave this, remember that speech he gave 2 years ago at the BET where he said white people suck and black people are relentless victims of relentless white racism all the time, everywhere. That explains everything. Huge deal. Everybody stood up and clapped wildly. Well, the Washington Post said because Jesse Williams did not mention Black Lives Matter or that woman, and because LeBron James, King James, because he did not mention Black Lives Matter in one of his recent condemnations of relentless white racism, while they're overlooking Black Lives Matter and the contributions of queer, criminal, mentally challenged people. And the Washington Post was not going to stand for that. No, no, no. One thing the Post did kind of leave out that somebody else picked up. This is weird. This was like Entertainment Week, the website called, and it's a funny place to find somebody from Black Lives Matter book, but it kind of tells you how the people that are in denial, deceit, and delusion have their tentacles in a lot of different places in the newsroom. Sports, lifestyle, fitness, in nature, environment, whatever. So they were covering this speech about this book. In connection with the book, it was some conference. But everybody goes to conferences. And the conferences are always put on by universities or nonprofit foundations. And they find these people that write these ridiculous books about black victimization. They give them a ton of money, and that's their thing. They fly around the country first class, and they speak at conferences, and they look at the white audience, and they tell them all white people suck. Everybody stands up and claps. Anyway, so in this article in Entertainment Weekly, that's where they kind of remind everybody, oh yeah, this is a great idea. We got a new idea coming up now. Oh, can't wait for this one to get popular. We have to get rid of prisons. We have to get rid of prisons. Yeah. Yeah. That's what the Washington Post is lauding these days. people who go around saying we have to get rid of prisons because everybody knows prisons are just full of black people, and the only reason they're there is because we have criminalized poverty. You know, if I had any sense, I wouldn't be trashing the Washington Post, because some of the biggest accolades I've ever received as a reporter or a writer have come from a little newspaper called the Washington Post. It came from a big thing that Post did, I think 2 years ago? They had the Post, what they did was, if you ever see Morning Joe on TV, you'll see the big dog from the Washington Post. His name is David Ignatius. He also writes espionage novels or novels of international intrigue. So the contest was, they would have David Ignatius write the first chapter of a spy thriller set in somewhere in the Mideast, and the readers of the Washington Post, we would write the next chapter. And you know, whoever wrote the best chapter won the contest for that week. And then the week after, the next, they'd have another contest. You'd have to build upon what the went on and on for 5 weeks. I won that contest 2 out of 5 times. I won the first contest where David Ignatius said I was his strong favorite as the winner of this. But then I thought, well, they're not going to let me win twice. So I submitted my entries. I submitted my next entry that I entered. I submitted that under a fake name, which in a novel about espionage, in a contest about espionage novels, that's fair game. Get in there, 4th week, guess who wins? Colin! Bam! So the Washington Post said they really got a charge out of the fact that I kind of got the mojo of the whole espionage thing, knowing that those guys were not going to let me win twice, changed my name, got the award. Yay, they thought it was very funny. They said, well played, sir. So I should be telling you that the Washington Post is full of all these geniuses with infallible judgment, especially in matters of literary judgment, especially when it comes to stuff good old Colin says. Well, they're not. You know, it's funny to read in the Washington Post this story that the person from Black Lives Matter, they're not getting enough attention. They're often overlooked. Well, this person, Black Lives Matter has been in the Washington Post over 1,000 times. And again, it's not just the news. It's in the editorial, it's in the book review, it's in the sports, it's in the environment, it's in the features, it's here, it's there, it's everywhere, it's all over the damn paper. Their viewpoint is accepted eagerly and uncritically. And this woman has been in dozens and dozens of stories in the Washington Post. She's just one of 3 founders. Nobody's overlooking her. She's been in every damn paper in the country, in the world, many times. Now they tell us she's been overlooked. So anyway, we finished it up with the guy from the Atlantic Post. He had a camera crew there. He had a video. He was taking his own video. There was a lovely lady with him, his assistant, or maybe he was her assistant. I don't know. But we were talking again. He was friendly. He was doing his Janet Malcolm thing. You know, all you got to do is smile, and you know, these suckers who are conservatives will just smile back in the hope that somehow we will finally convince liberals that we are nice people, that you can write, man, we're nice people. Man, if conservatives were nicer, wouldn't the Democrats and the liberals, wouldn't they just love us so much? Well, we got to get rid of this talk about race, Colin. That's why we got to get rid of this wall thing. Why we got to get rid of all of Trump's other ideas. If we did that, think how much they would like us. And then think how much we could accomplish, Colin. Listen, I've been to dinner with people like this. Dinner parties. I was sitting next to Brian Lamb of CNN. There was probably I don't think I was the token Republican. There was probably 10 people there, half Democrat, half Republican. And there's a member of Governor Wilson's staff was there. That's all he said all night. Republicans could just get off this crazy business of abortions and taxes and walls. Black and black criminality. Wouldn't it be such a nicer place where we could all get together with the guys from the Atlantic, guys from the New Yorker, hold hands, make plans, take warm showers together? A lot of Republicans and conservatives actually believe that on one level or another. It's funny though, if you hang around with liberals, and I've hung around with liberals too much in my life, I studied them. When I lived in San Diego, I was a reporter, of course, and did a lot of stories. So hung around, met people like that. My father-in-law was a liberal Democratic member of Congress for almost 20 years. Got the chance to meet a liberal or two along the way. San Diego, I did a weekly TV show for 5 years on Sunday. It would air on Sunday afternoons. It was kind of one of these 4 or 5 panel people. It was one conservative, me, 4 liberals. I beat them all with my hand tied behind my back every week anyway. But it was interesting who the moderator was. The moderator, I think I'll save his name because if you're a Trump person, you might even recognize this name. I'll save the name. The moderator was the big liberal boogeyman of San Diego. He was the guy that was going to shut down all the land development, shut down all the home building, put all the people out of business so we could all hold hands, make plans, and tiptoe through the tulips of the environmentally beautiful desert that would result in that kind of policy. He was the boogeyman. But after writing it, I had read most of everything he'd ever written up to that point, and so I knew who he was. I knew all about him. I talked to him a few times as a reporter. I didn't have any problem with him. I mean, he was, like I said, he was the liberal boogeyman. He reveled in that role. He was also a professor at a local university. He ran for mayor one time, won the primary, lost the general, ran for mayor again, won the primary, lost the general. And in the course of all that, we actually got to be buddies. We played golf together. We'd gone to casinos together. And so we did this show for 5 years. He was the moderator, I was the panelist. And I don't know, some people watched it. I think they thought it was good. I don't know. So I've seen a lot, I've seen these guys these liberals up close. You look them in the eye, and when they talk about a home builder who wants to build some homes, they look in the eye, that they're not going to be happy till not just they stop that project, but they're not going to be happy until every single home builder on the planet is out of business. So we can all go live in tents under bridges in California. Oh yeah, that's what they're doing right now. But so it's interesting. This guy, Peter, almost gave his name away. He was a professor in San Diego. He moved up to the University of California, Irvine, where he spent more time writing about energy. Then after energy, I know another energy economist. They said they liked his stuff. They liked his work, and I never felt like I knew enough about that particular field to be able to judge it. Even though I kind of read it. And every time he would get close to talking about nuclear power, he would be going racing at 100 miles an hour, talk about nuclear power. It's how it's going to solve all of our problems for clean energy. But right when he got up to 5 feet away from it, he would veer around it and continue on as if there was never anything there in the first place. So he goes up but when he went to the University of California, Irvine, he got up there and he kind of started writing about a different topic on top of energy. And he started writing about China, how China was a bad actor in the international economic field, how they were cheating, how they were manipulating currency, how they had unfair advantages over Americans because of the way their system ran. He wrote one book and another and another. Trump read those books. This guy's name is Peter Navarro. Peter Navarro is now like the head of oh God, I said Trump. Sorry, I didn't mean that. I like Trump. He's head of the Navarro anti-China trade effort. I don't know what they call it. He's the head of the thing. He's got an office in the White House. I mean, he is to Trump on China what Ann Coulter is to Trump on immigration. So, I've been watching these liberals for a long time. And the idea that conservatives, if we suck up to them, we're going to get something, they're going to change. No, they're not going to change. Believe me, they're not. When they sit around with their buddies, and I've been in many rooms where I was the only bad guy in the room with them. They're not sitting around contemplating how if they acted differently, if they behaved better, those Republicans might start liking us. No, they couldn't care less. I've never heard one Democrat say that. I've heard many Republicans say that. If we could just get better people in our party, they'd be nicer. Peggy Noon is actually guilty of this a lot. If we just be nicer, wouldn't the Democrats like us? Couldn't we all get along? How could anybody not get along with Chuck Schumer or Charles Todd? How could anybody not get along with those angels and saints on Morning Joe? How could they? Why are you so mean and bad, Colin? Colin, why are you embarrassing with all this talk of black criminality? You know the Democrats are down with black people. Can't we just put that aside for now? Well, unfortunately, that kind of attitude, explicit or implicit, you can find that in a lot of conservative publications. They're just not ready to talk about this whole episode of black criminality wildly out of proportion. They'll talk, if they see a professor or somebody on a college campus say something ridiculous, they'll do a story about it. Black Lives Matter says all white people suck. They'll do a story of that and they'll dutifully report that white people probably do not suck and everybody knows what's going on. But I try to talk more plainly than that. And whereas I do not have expectations of Andrew or the guy named David, I think his name was David from The Atlantic, I don't have any expectations for them. Thus, there is, it's impossible for me to be disappointed. No disappointment, no anger, no unhappiness. I do have some expectations of Republican papers and thinkers. I do have some expectations of them that they will look at this and go, oh yeah, this whole denial, deceit, and delusion surrounding black criminality is really the absolute worst case scenario of fake news, of liberal news, of a refutation of everything conservatives really believe in, which is, the individual and merit and all this stuff. This is all the opposite of that. But still, a lot of people don't want any part of it. Now, you notice one of the little mantras or slogans we have on this channel and on my videos is that we talk about this stuff without racism, without rancor, without apology. So when I do a story about black criminality wildly out of proportion, I don't say, well, not every black person in Garland, Florida was out killing Asian people the other night. I just want to remind you of that. And of the black, I don't say, those two guys that killed that Asian guy in Garland, Texas the other night, we're going to hear that video in a minute. We're going to hear the audio from that. Those two guys, well, we're going to let that one act define their lives? No. So I don't do that apology thing. I just try to speak plainly. And because I think the more you apologize, the more you explain what you're up to in an apologetic fashion, that you make yourself a bigger target. People sense weakness. People sense you're not sure of what you're talking about. And that way people feel like they can, wail on you and say bad things about you that are not true. And I don't play that game. So let's fast reverse back to the party Saturday night. I've done talking to Andrew from the New Yorker. I'm done talking to David from The Atlantic. I'm with my buddies Johnny and Kathy. We're talking to Gavin McInnes. Great to see Gavin. I've been on his show many a times. Really like Gavin. He did a 1 or 2 minute thing for my Minds.com page. Went up to see Stefan Molyneux. I say, hey, Stefan, can I do a 1-minute interview? Just say hello to my boys on my new, video thing. Great. He stood up, happy, did a great job on it. Boom, 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 done. Boy, and that crowd, these guys are very popular. And I know they're popular because people will come up to me that night. Go, hey, are you Colin? A lot of people did this. Are you Colin? You that guy? Yeah, I'm Colin. Yeah. You Colin Flaherty? Then everybody was like happy to meet me, very happy to meet me. But a lot of people said, oh yeah, I saw you on Stefan. After I saw you on Stefan, I went on and got your books, or I saw you on Gavin's show. Went out and got your books and subscribed to you. And, man, you're really good. So I'm really happy that you're here. And I've never met Cernovich, but I don't, everything I've had reading his stuff is like he's one of the good guys. Okay. There's my apology. There's my preemptive apology from what I'm about to say now. Because during this party, the next thing after the meet and greet, they had a podcast featuring Gavin and Cernovich and Molyneux and a comedian, very funny comedian named Owen Benjamin. Very funny guy. Q&A, and the first one stood up, forget the first question. And I'm not going to reproduce that thing here. I'm just not going to. I don't want to embarrass anybody. But if you want to find the podcast, the copy of the podcast online, you can. But I'm going to tell you this is what happened. A Chinese guy stood up. Chinese immigrant stood up. I later found out because he and I talked for an hour later on that night, and he's now like my biggest buddy in the world. He's from Montreal. Parents were immigrants. He's an immigrant. He also was an immigrant. Just graduated from college, starting a business. He stands up and he says, my uncle is a racist. Now, how can I kind of convince him to change his mind? What should I do about that? And to me, that was a softball question. That was a question that every one of those guys should have knocked out of the park. Okay, he stood up. They actually had some fun at his expense for him being Asian. Okay, I didn't think it was funny, but what do I know? I'm not a professional comedian. I do enjoy wit. I don't really enjoy people who mock other people and try to get some laughs out of it. Not over their appearance or over their nationality or anything like that. I just don't. I like wit. I like responding to what people say, that kind of stuff. So he asked the question, and all four guys, they took a swing at it, and they just totally missed it. I think last thing I heard on it was Cernovich was explaining to him that his uncle has had some setbacks in his life. He's a very unhappy person. That's why he blames other people for his problems. This is a Chinese guy, right? The uncle, and so this uncle is also an immigrant. So actually, I got kind of annoyed at that. And I'm going to tell you what I would have said in a minute. But I got to tell you what happened right after I got annoyed. I just got up. But it's like, I don't need to listen to this. I wasn't angry. I wasn't unhappy. I just said, hey, I'm going to go out in the lobby and have an adult beverage and see what's going on out there. Went out there. But on the way out, I stopped at the bar. I didn't even get an adult beverage. I stopped at the bar. I went up to the bartender. There were 3 black guys standing behind the bar. I don't know if they were officially bartenders. I don't know if they were bar backs. I don't know. All I know is I was one of these long bars, probably 20 or 30 feet. And I was the only one there. Walked up to him. I didn't make him come to walk to me. I walked right up to him, looked him in the eye. He's 3 feet from me. I look at him, I say, hey, what's up? Can I get a Coke? He ignored me. There's 2 fellas on either side ignored me. They were totally, I don't want to say they were totally focused on what was happening on the stage, but they were totally focused on they were so unhappy about these big bad white people that were, even the answer they gave to that Chinese guy wasn't a good enough answer. They were convinced they were basically tending bar for a room full of black people. Message: the more you try to placate the liberals and the fellas, the more unhappy they get. I looked, this guy didn't know me from Adam. Not from Adam. Walked up 3 feet. He ignored me. Finally, a guy that I would recognize from his accent, I lived on the border for 35 years as a Mexican guy, person of Mexican descent, came up to me. Hey, what can I get you, sir? I said, how about a Coke? So he kind of, I don't know, he gave me a nonverbal signal to move down the bar away from the fellas. We're about 10 feet away from the fellas. He's pouring me a Coke, and I give him my little ticket. He goes, "Oh, no, keep that ticket. You're going to need that ticket to buy drinks for all the hot ladies that come in there tonight." You know, it was a funny joke. It was meant in a spirit of good humor. I didn't realize later, and maybe I'm just imagining it now, but I think he saw what was going on, and he wanted to get me away from that thing, just to make sure, you know, there wasn't any more pleasantness, and he wanted to smooth over that ridiculous encounter I had just had, where 3 black people standing 3 feet from me ignored my request for a Coca-Cola. Okay, so I go out in the lobby. Met a lot of people out there, I'm telling you. We're going to get to later on, I come back to, you know, sit down with my friends, Johnny and Kathy again. I see the guys from the New Yorker and the Atlantic again. Hey, what's up? And I see the Chinese guy who stood up and told us about his uncle, who had a problem with black people, and of whom we learned that it was probably his uncle had some unhappiness in his own life, and he was projecting it onto the black people. I went up to him and I said, "Hey, I'm Colin Flaherty. I know you don't know who I am or anything, but I write about black on Asian violence. I've done videos on black on Asian violence more than any person on this planet or any other planet in any alternate universe you happen to believe in." That's for all you Philip Pullman fans out there. He said he was very happy to meet me. I said, "Oh, thanks. Nice to meet you. Very nice." I said, let me ask you a question. I heard your question. I want you to do one thing for me when you see your uncle again. I want you to ask your uncle if he has ever been the victim of black violence and criminality. This guy from Montreal, this young Chinese guy, 22 years old from Montreal, said, "I don't have to ask. I already know. He used to run a convenience store in the ghetto. Yes, he's been the victim of that." I said, "Oh man, here we go." And so the answer I would have given had I been on that stage is I would have said, "Listen, you are aware that Asian people are targets of black criminality all over the country, correct?" And this is what I told him. And every, you know, the way these stories come out is you tell one, and 10 stories don't come into your mind at once. But what happens is you tell one, it leads to another, to another, to another. It's like dominoes. They just keep tripping into the horizon. And my dominoes can trip into the horizon, circling the globe a few times. I mean, we're talking, this can go on for a very long time. And so the first domino I talked about was, the San Francisco Examiner wrote a story once about, they looked at the last 400 robberies on the streets of San Francisco. And they found out that a lot of the robberies were black on Asian. I looked at him, I said, "How many do you think were black on Asian?" He said, "I don't know, 30, 40, 50%. 85% is the correct answer. 85% of the robberies on the streets of San Francisco are black on Asian. Even the San Francisco daily papers had to admit that was San Francisco's dirty little secret. This enormous black on Asian violence." He didn't have any idea about that. So what about Los Angeles? Same story. There was an epidemic of black on Asian violence in Los Angeles. Got to the point where the CBS affiliate in Los Angeles, this is in Don't Make the Black Kids Angry, most of these stories, the CBS affiliate in Los Angeles found a guy that was convicted and sent to prison for targeting, he and his crew would target old Asian women. And now he was setting his life straight, so I think where the program he was working was kind of pushing him forward as an example of a bright, shining city on a hill, which I didn't buy, but doesn't matter, does it? Because he came out and looked at the camera again and said, "We used to target old Asian women because we knew they had money and we knew they couldn't fight back." Then the next domino trips said, "Did you hear about Sacramento? Over the last 2 years, there's been an epidemic of black on Asian violence in Sacramento. Lots of it all this is on video, right? I mean, I'm not asking anybody to believe anything. I'm just asking you to watch the videos." South Sacramento. Enormous amount of black on Asian violence. We have a lot of video of it. The craziest video, to my mind, is months ago when the people finally started recognizing that, I think I see a pattern here. All the victims are Asian. And, well, I just can't quite put my finger on who the criminals are, except there's this guy named Colin Flaherty out in the East Coast. He says they're all black, which they are. So they have a big meeting. And there's hundreds of people in this room. They're all Asian. And I don't expect them to know my thing. See, their thing is they work and they save and they invest and they provide for their families. That's their thing. They have businesses or they have a job they go to every damn day. And so everyone in the room was really kind of puzzled, like, A, what's going on? B, how do you allow this to continue? And the politicians from Sacramento who are down with the cause 100% stood up and they said, oh, we don't like this. No, we don't like this. No, we don't like this one bit. We're working really hard. A couple months later, it kept happening. Oh, no, we're working harder. A couple months later, it's a ritual now. Every couple months, they put a bunch of Asian people in a room with some public officials in Sacramento, and everybody promises, oh, we're not going to take, no, that last one was the final straw. We're not going to take this anymore. The same thing they do in downtown Minneapolis. It's like clockwork. Has it been 3 months? Then let's have a meeting of all the businesses in downtown Minneapolis. We complain about black criminality and have all the politicians who are down with the cause every other minute of the day walk into the room and go, oh no, we're not going to take this. We're not going to take it one bit. You know, in Washington, D.C., they really got tough in Washington, D.C. This is like a couple weeks ago. Somebody in Washington, D.C. discovered that there's lots of fellows on buses and subways and the metro line of Washington, D.C. who are, let's just say they're blowing off some steam by robbing people and killing people on video. White people, tourists, employees, husbands of NPR executives. They had a meeting about it. Then they got real serious and they hired a consultant to tell them what to do about it. So the consultant, he knew everybody was at the end of their line. They needed some tough reaction. They needed a plan that was going to work, 100% guaranteed. So the consultant said, you know what? We got to have a public relations campaign, including TV commercials, reminding all the black people in Washington, D.C. that bus drivers are people too, and you shouldn't beat them, spit at them, abuse them, threaten them, hit them, and do all sorts of other nasty things to them. And so the dominoes just keep tripping. These were some of the things I was going through with this young man. I was reminding him out in Philadelphia, there's an epidemic of black on Asian violence in Philadelphia, especially against these people like his uncle. This is happening all over the country, not just Philly. Especially against these people who run these convenience stores. Philadelphia, it got so bad that the convenience store owners, they put plexiglass up, put this impenetrable barrier between themselves and the fellas and their lovely ladies, which makes it a little more inconvenient for the fellas when they want to throw cokes or throw sandwiches or threaten or spit or rob or punch the person on the other side of the counter. Yes, we have so many videos of that, it's ridiculous. I haven't posted 1/10 of them. So they're behind plexiglass. So a few months ago, a city councilwoman in Philadelphia named Cindy Bass, she decided that all the Asian business owners putting up their plexiglass is an insult to the dignity of all of her criminal constituents, and she said so. Again, they had a meeting in front of a city council committee meeting. They had 3 hours worth of testimony about how, well, this is you're really bad, and we can, we can't have this plexiglass because everybody knows having plexiglass causes black people to commit crimes. You know that, don't you, Colin? Colin, you don't know that, Colin? Colin, you're not really that smart, are you? Are you a conservative? Are you one of those dumb conservatives who don't understand the relationship? We've demonstrated in 87 studies that having plexiglass causes crime. Colin, I think we're going to have to take you off YouTube and make sure anybody from the New Yorker and the Atlantic magazine never writes a decent story about you or says anything at all about what you're saying. No, Colin, you do not belong in the public square if you don't understand that. So anyway, 3 hours into the meeting, they finally let the Asian people who were there talk. And they did what most civilians do for them in the first time in this arena when they're confronted with this enormous level of black criminality, violence, and media attention. They apologized, they hemmed, they hawed. They denied they were the racists. No, but it was 3 hours in. Nobody was listening to them. Nobody cared what they said. Everybody knew what was going to happen. You know, in these public meetings, they're kabuki. I've been behind the podium whispering in people's ears enough to know I've never been in that situation where everybody involved, every decision maker involved didn't know exactly what was going to happen before, during, and after the meeting. It's kabuki. Everybody knows who's going to vote for what. Because if the person who wants the legislation wants to remove the plexiglass, if she doesn't have support, she's not going to take it to her little part. She's not going to do her little party out in front of the committee. And that's what happened here. So now we have the Asian people wandering around in the wilderness looking at each other going, we're not racist. Why are you taking our plexiglass down and making us so vulnerable to these to these black on Asian attacks? And nobody has an answer for them. Nobody will say in public, which is, black people are just not that into Asian people. Let's listen to this story out of Garland, Texas, because this story about black on Asian violence happened, I think it happened at the exact minute I was talking to that Chinese kid from Montreal in a Midtown Manhattan party. This was happening at the exact second in Garland, Texas.
It was just before midnight Saturday night at this Exxon gas station at the corner of Oates and Broadway in Garland. 35-year-old Manish Pandey was getting ready to close down for the day when these two armed men in hoodies, captured on surveillance photos released by police, came in to rob the store.
During the confrontation, a struggle ensued between the clerk and the two suspects, and ultimately the clerk was shot. The two suspects fled the location.
Police say during the struggle, one suspect's hood came down, giving the cameras a better look at his face. It's unclear if the two got away with any cash. Sometime after the shooting, police say an unknowing bystander came into the store.
They arrived on scene. They walked inside. They saw that the clerk had been shot. They came outside, and fortunately a patrol unit was actually driving down the street at that time, and they were able to flag them down.
Police combed the scene for several hours, collecting evidence well into the morning. Several customers came by the store, shocked and heartbroken to learn Pandey was killed.
You hear it around places, but whenever it's this close to home, you don't really expect it.
Kurt Groves lives nearby and sometimes stops by the store.
It hits home a lot. When you have kids and it's right here, you go to that gas station, quite a bit, and you're not expecting something like that to happen around here.
Sunday afternoon, the store was shuttered. A single rose left at the door to remember the clerk who lost his life. Family members, friends, and co-workers gathered at the store to mourn the loss. They didn't want to talk on camera, but say Pandey is originally from Nepal. His cousin tells Fox 4 Pandey worked at the store for 7 years, was a hard worker, and leaves behind a wife who is pregnant with the couple's first child.
On this channel and other places, when I hear somebody say, to be fair, Colin, that always means, that's the preface for saying, Colin, I'm about to say something extremely stupid that is going to seem, it's going to be transparently obvious that it's stupid, except we're in a public place, so I'm really counting on that for you not to disagree with me on this too strongly. So here's my version of that. To be fair, we don't know if the Asian people who are victims of black criminality, like this guy's uncle, like the relatives of this guy we just heard about in Garland, or the person we're about to hear. This is not Asian, this is an old person. The person we're about to hear about. We don't know if it's an Asian thing or a black on old person thing.
Whole thing caught on camera, and now the hunt is on for 3 young men they say preyed on this helpless victim. CBS 4's Carrie Codd spoke with her tonight, and he's live in Lauderdale Lakes. Carrie.
Yes, Rick, it was Monday afternoon when an 81-year-old woman parked her car here in this Lauderdale Lakes Walmart parking lot. She was coming here to shop for a computer mouse, but what she didn't know, detectives say, is that the entire time she was being followed by a trio of young thieves.
Surveillance cameras captured an 81-year-old woman leaving her car in a Lauderdale Lakes Walmart parking lot Monday and heading into the store. Broward Sheriff's detectives say she was unaware that three young people, believed to be teenagers, followed her into the store, tailed her every movement, and followed her out of the store. Then they confronted her at her car. One young man with a gun in hand demanded her car keys.
My answer was, bye, and smiling. Give me the key.
The victim spoke to us and asked us to conceal her identity.
I was friendly because I thought that's kids.
Even though they apparently were kids, they weren't so friendly. They stole her car, nearly hitting her as they peeled wheels out of the parking lot.
I didn't know that because I was so shocked.
This outgoing, charming woman who loves people said she still cannot understand why these armed kids targeted her.
That's what I am asking myself.
They're targeting the most vulnerable, elderly citizens, an elderly woman shopping alone.
Broward Sheriff's Office spokesperson Gina Carter has a pretty good idea why. And what really alarms investigators is the apparent age of these thieves.
The fact that these guys are so young is really alarming. The fact that they have a weapon and they're so young is terrifying.
The victim's family showed us these pictures of the woman's car. They said it was discovered wrecked a short distance from the Walmart after it was stolen. The victim told us she's scared and doesn't want to go out, but she's tough and says she wants these guys caught so they can face punishment.
I want to face these people. Yeah. And I mean it because I know what kind of damage I have now.
And the victim and her family did find a silver lining here. They did say that they're so grateful to the witnesses and do-gooders who stayed by that woman's side who was alone here.
I mean, how many stories of black on Asian violence do you need to hear? That's how many there are. Not one person at that meeting, not one person on the podium ever heard of Young Man or book Chinese Girl in the Ghetto. She was an immigrant. She moved here at 11 years old. I think she was of a certain age, so I'm guessing let me see. I think it was in the 70s she moved here. She moved to Oakland because when you're an immigrant, you come here, sometimes Catholic Charities or a group like that will help you with your housing, and they'll say, oh, we've got some very inexpensive housing you're going to love. They put you right in the middle of the ghetto. They made her life a living hell. The fellows and their lovely ladies in Oakland, in the ghetto, harassed, threatened. I call that torture. The young Ying Ma, she survived. She thrived. She kept her eyes on the prize. Now she's an attorney, noted speaker, successful author. Despite this enormous amount of racial hostility that she experienced in Oakland, black on Chinese, documented in Chinese Girl in the Ghetto. Check that one out too. Anybody who read Don't Make the Black Kids Angry has heard of the story of, that I published also in Breitbart, the story of Asian, we subtitled it Asian Girl Bleed a Lot. It was a story of 5,000 Asians from Nepal and Burma who were legitimate refugees, gentle, God-fearing people who bought into the American life 100%. They believe in working, saving, investing, taking care of their families, obeying the law, staying in their lanes. 5,000 of them moved to Rochester, New York. The minute they stepped off the plane, every single one of those 5,000 people were subject to harassment, threats, taunting, violence, and murder. It took the local paper 5 years to figure out they had been in the middle of a tsunami of black on Asian violence. And when the paper finally figured it out, they spent literally half the article going, well, we know all black people are not attacking the Asians. I mean, all the Asians are attacked, but not all black people are attacking them. So we don't want to give any misunderstanding, and we don't really understand why there's so much misplaced anger among the Asians in Rochester against the black people. That's not good. I think I'm making that up, don't you? You don't think there's responsible, smart people, educated people who are on this planet who are capable of saying such idiotic things, do you? You realize how easy it would be to prove me wrong if that is the case. They went around to the chief of police, the black guy, done many stories on Rochester involving him. He had just retired 2 weeks before. They went to him and they said, "Oh, what's up with all this black on Asian violence?" He said, "No, that's normal for immigrants. Black on immigrant violence is normal. They'll get used to it. They will learn how to fight. That's normal." Do you suppose when they were going through, their orientation where they got all the literature about life in America, there was a little section in there saying, "Oh yeah, here's a little thing about black people you may or may not know. You wouldn't know if you listened to CNN International, but here's what it really is. If you're an Asian person, you move into a black neighborhood, you can expect to be the victim of ridiculous levels of violence and harassment." Do you suppose that was in their immigration orientation? It was not. And so they went to other people. The United Way is always funding these anti-violence initiatives in places like Rochester. Translation: they find some unemployed black person, throw a lot of money at him, who has a degree from black university, throw a lot of money at him, and they say, "Listen, if we need somebody to appear before a TV saying what a great job we're doing fighting black violence and how we're going to finally solve it in about 10 years, doing whatever crazy idea you want to do, you're going to be the guy, okay? That's okay with you?" "Oh, sure, that's fine with me." And that's how it works. That's how they roll. So they went to those guys and they said, "Hey, what's up with all this black on Asian violence?" They go, "What black? We haven't heard what black on Asian violence? We haven't heard anything about that." And that doesn't even count in Rochester, all the black on white violence, places like the Lilac Festival. It's a flower show. It's a yearly flower show. Rochester used to be the home of all these mega corporations, IBM, Xerox, a couple of others. And all the executives, their wives would form a club and they had this flower show. It was a thing. Now for years and years, every Lilac Festival is ruined by large groups of black people going in there, fighting, destroying property, firing guns, challenging police, beating up people. That's Rochester. Head back down to Philly for some more black on Asian violence. A year ago, the black on Asian violence got so bad in Philadelphia, they had 1,000 Asian people on the streets of Philadelphia carrying signs. Very polite signs. Nobody's saying, "Hey, black people, why are you attacking Asian people?" No, they were saying stuff like, "We have a dream, content of our character, and can we stop the violence?" As if somehow the violence was happening to itself. I reminded this guy from Montreal. So what about, I said, the first story I ever did that got me started on this whole thing was out of South Philadelphia. It was about black on Asian violence in a school, South Philadelphia High School. At that point, we had moved into the lobby, and one of my readers and viewers came up named David. He goes, "Hey, are you Colin?" I go, Yeah. So I interrupted what I was telling Samuel from Montreal. Talked to David for a while, and I said, "Hey, David, stick around. I want you to hear this." So I start telling the story of South Philadelphia High School. David knew the story. I said, "David, you tell the story." He knew the story because he read the books, he watched the videos. He said, "Yeah, a bunch of black people were attacking Asian kids for years and years and years and years, till one day 13 of them went to the emergency room and black kids declared a Beat an Asian Day in the school." The kids have gone to the teachers, gone to the principal, gone to the security, gone to the superintendent. They all got the same answer. "Oh, we can't let that happen." But you know what? There's not really much we can do about it. And finally, after years of this, the newspaper kind of figured out lots of Asian kids were under attack at the school. So they did a couple stories about Asian kids under attack. Apparently the attacks were like spontaneous generation of fire, spontaneous combustion, because there was no attackers. There was just people being attacked. There were people doing the attacking were not identified. My brother and I were on the radio, and I made some phone calls, figured out exactly what was going on. Black people attacking Asians over a long period, daily for years in that school. Got on the radio and said, "Hey, that's a black thing. That's a race riot. That's a long-term, low-intensity race riot." other reporters at the station, liberal and conservative, they came up to me and whispered, Colin, that's not a black thing. That's just a neighborhood thing. It doesn't have anything to do with race, Colin. That's when I knew. As soon as I heard those guys say that, including the big liberal at the station, as soon as I heard them say that, I said, wow, that's even crazier than the violence to say that somehow this is a coincidence. Now that is crazy. That's worth writing about. I'm going to stay on this. We're going to write about it. So I told Samuel and David told Samuel that story. And how the superintendent wrote a letter to the black students and how she started whispering to the reporters saying, the Asian students, and they antagonize the black students. That's why they're getting beat up all the time. I mean, our school's about 95, 6, 7, 8% black and only a couple of percent Asian. So they don't really know how to treat black people. That's why they're being attacked. That's what she told reporters later on, she put out a flyer that said, here's how gave the flyer to the Asian kids. Here's how Asian people should treat black people so you do not antagonize them so they will not attack you. No, I don't expect you to believe one damn thing of this until you look it up in my book and check the links, check the sources, check the story. You know what you're going to find out when you do that? It's about 10 times worse than what I just described. How many of these stories do you want? How many stories of large-scale violence against Asians do you want all over the country? Being followed home from casinos by the dozens. What about Indian immigrants being the object of black violence who know they have gold? How about, I even asked Samuel this. Has Samuel ever heard of a song called Meet the Flockers? I think the Mind.com rules on copyright are a little different than YouTube. I mean, we're absolutely entitled to use certain otherwise copyright material when we're using it for certain reasons, like in the news sphere, allowed to use it in limited amounts, and that's why we are able to post these clips. But I don't want. But when you start messing with the record companies, they're much more aggressive in taking your videos down. So I'd rather, I post it, but I do have a video of that. I think I'll post it. I'll just repost my old one. Meet the Flockers. You can look it up. Meet the Flockers. It's a step-by-step instruction on video by a guy named YG of how black people can rob Asian people. Do you believe that? Do you believe that's true? Do you believe, are you kind of willing to believe it? You're kind of like saying to yourself, I don't believe it. Colin's exaggerating. No. That's what I would be saying if I were you. Meet the Flockers by YG. Then you'll see, when you look it up, then you'll see other stories going, oh yeah, well, we did this because we got the idea from the video YG. In the LA area, they busted up a burglary ring. 5,000 burglaries over a couple of years. People some of the fellas from Long Beach. 5,000 burglaries. That's how they did it. Just exactly the way you describe it in Meet the Flockers. You drive through a neighborhood, you look, you figure out who the Chinese people are through one way or another, follow them home, look in the phone book, whatever. Knock on the door. Anybody's home? Oh, excuse me, I'm selling magazine subscriptions. Nobody's home. You have your fellas who are ready to do what it do. And when the 5,000 and they finally busted up the ring, 5,000 burglaries in Southern California, it's amazing. 5,000, you can do 5,000 without getting caught. Wow. They found out that an overwhelming majority of the victims were Asians. Because the Asians are, the chances of an Asian couple being home in the daytime are slim. They're doing a little thing called work. And so I told Samuel that's the kind of stuff I wanted to hear from the platform. I didn't want to hear about an individual case about Samuel's uncle, because that's like a Dr. Phil thing, right? I mean, that's the big weakness of talk radio. This is what Rush discovered why he is so successful. He figured out the callers were the big weakness of talk radio. Because just because you have a lot of callers, if they're not saying interesting, informed, authoritative things, if they're just getting up there and saying, hey man, I don't like the street lights on my town corner. They cost $20,000. It's too much money. No. That's not interesting enough to sustain a talk show. So you have to have an interesting guy like Rush, and he has very few guests because he is the guest. He's the one who knows what's going on. And so when the guys on the panel, when they talked about this individual case, that's really a Dr. Phil thing, right? Where you put I'm sorry, I started this Dr. Phil metaphor twice. Let me cast it aside again. Because on talk radio, a lot of the Lonely Hearts, they used to have a lot more women psychologists on the air, and women would call and say, oh, my boyfriend did this, my boyfriend did that, he's a bad person, but I still love him, what should I do? And then the caller and the host sit there, complain about the boy and boyfriends in general for the next 1 hour, and that's the show. Wrap it up. Yay, what sisterhood? Well, Dr. Laura's the one who busted up that mold. Women would call and they'd say, Dr. Laura, my boyfriend, he's a bad person. He did this, he did that, he did this, he did that. He drinks beer all the time. I don't like that, Dr. Laura. And she would say, well, did you ever see any of that behavior when you met? Did you know he was like that when you met? First answer, no, Dr. Laura, I never knew that. And she goes, Dr. Laura would wait. Or maybe she would say, maybe she does say, oh, really? She said, well, when I met him, he had just finished drinking 36 beers in 30 minutes, but I thought that was a one-time thing. And, he did that every night for the next 2 years, but I thought he would get over it. Thought he'd make a good daddy for our 6 children. Now he keeps drinking beer, Dr. Laura. I can't understand what's going on here. And so that's what was going on at at the party with my brothers on the panel. They took one person's point of view about who his uncle was, and they kind of did your uncle's a bad person because he has these things and see, that has no value. What has value is to say, okay, this is an example of bigger things that are happening. Let's use this as an example of bigger things that we can really educate people about something going on, because however good or bad that guy's uncle is, he's not really, worth the attention of 1,000 big shot conservative opinion leaders. Unless it has larger meaning. We've done a lot of, I like this guy, Sam, this kid, I call him a kid, he's 22. Very well put together very well, nicely dressed, well spoken, really on the ball. But we've done videos, we've done lots of material on my different channels about a special scorn we have for the second and third generation Asian kid who looks back at their grandparents or their older relatives at the Thanksgiving dinner and they say, you are a racist. When what they're really not understanding is when their grandparents came over to this country from pick a country, they knew what their life was going to be like for the next 20 or 30 years. They knew their life was going to be unrelenting work, unrelenting discipline, unrelenting dedication to achieving their goals of giving their family a decent life with a college education. Part of giving them a decent life is shielding their second and third generation after them from the ridiculous level of black violence directed at Asian people where they were working, usually, maybe in a convenience store. Maybe they owned it. And so these relatives do all this stuff to shield their Asian offspring who are now, going to some Ivy League school, listening to some ridiculous white Ivy League professor talk about white privilege. and white racism. And by the way, Asians benefit from it too. So you're just as guilty, and the Asian kids take it home and they tell the parents, "Oh, you're so screwed up for your racism." All the time, the parents have been shielding them from it, from the reality of it. So that's the kind of stuff I was hoping to hear from the platform that night. Didn't hear it. Again, I've been on Stefan's show and with Gavin. I hope I get there again, but that doesn't matter as much to me as speaking plainly about this, even when people who are my friends and my brothers lose their way. Even when conservatives go off the track and they just say, man, if I'm just nice to these black people, they'll stop doing their criminal thing and they'll give me cover, and they'll be the ones who speak about black dysfunction, so I am relieved of the responsibility to do it. I can just let them do it, and I can go back to speaking about things like Antifa beating up somebody from our party out in the street. But man, let's go back to this party for a minute, now that I've been totally rude by maybe disagreeing with our hosts a little bit. Man, it was amazing the number of people I met there. I met people who flew in from London for this. 2 guys flew in from London. They came up to me. They knew who good old Colin was. They watched my videos over there. Guy from Laguna Beach owns a car repair business in Laguna Beach. Came up to me. People from Michigan, people from Toronto. Where else did people? I mean, it was stunning where people came from to come to this party. There were a lot of people there. And every single person who was there, people just walk up to each other and talk to each other. And everybody was like happy to greet each other. A young couple came up. I should say a young couple. They're about in their 40s. They've been going out together for like 7 years. Because people come up to me, the first thing I say is not, "Hey everybody, I'm Colin Flaherty, and I do this channel on black violence and white denial." No, they know who I am. They knew what I'm about. I was learning about them, who they are, what they're up to, how they got here. A couple came up. They were big fans of my books, big fans of this channel, and they're happy to talk to me. I said, how? One guy introduced as his fiance. I said, "When are you guys getting married?" That's what you do when you listen to people. You respond to what they say. "Well, we haven't set the date yet." So, how long have you been engaged? Like 8 years? Oh, come on, man. This is your year. Go get married. A lot of lovely ladies came up to good old Colin. Tried to convince me of the error of my ways for being a hermit down here in Wilmington, Delaware, squirreling myself away and making videos and writing books, which precludes me from getting out and about and going to great parties like that one. So maybe I'll have to change my thinking on getting to these parties, because Cernovich throws an unbelievably good party. And everybody, and so ultimately, what makes a good party? A mixture of things, but ultimately it's people you're happy to see, people who are happy to see you. The thing had a rooftop. We went up on the rooftop, smoked cigars. I made 2 major mistakes. One, I didn't bring enough business cards with my name and picture on it. 2, I didn't bring enough cigars. Major mistakes. So that's what I did at the party. People, I'm sorry I wasn't more involved with the Antifa people. I'm sorry I wasn't down there fawning over Chelsea Manning, extending my hand in friendship to demonstrate that good old Colin is down with the cause of humanity among all people. Do liberals do that? Do they ever extend their hands in friendship across to us, invite us to parties, and say, man, this liberal conservative stuff, man, we all just got to get together? Or do they come to our parties and go, you guys are a bunch of Nazis? Chelsea Manning, whatever the hell her name is, the guy who had a sex change, who gave out all this confidential information, terabytes of it. But he's sitting at the party going, I came here to breach, the divide between left and right. And he goes out and tweets, starts calling people people at the party, starts calling him Nazis and fascists and every other thing you could imagine. Oh, did I tell you the people these liberals who write these articles in the spirit of Janet Malcolm, even if it doesn't matter if you're reading them or writing them, they don't really have a really strong association with the truth. That's my roundabout way of saying they're quite capable of lying their asses off. I think Cernovich pointed that out too on his Twitter this morning. All right, let's wrap this thing up. So that's what I did at the great party. I think the best party I've ever been in my life. I really had a great time meeting everybody there. It turns out there was a lot of people there I did not meet. So maybe I'll get a chance to meet them at the next one if I am indeed invited to the next one. Perhaps I'll even be invited to speak. Or I can ruin the party by telling Chinese people that they are targets of black violence all over the damn country, and it's time conservatives started speaking up for them, and it's time conservatives started asking Chinese people in this country, the immigrants, why are you voting 75% Democrat? That's suicidal. Because don't you know, even if it means covering up for people who target and killed Chinese immigrants and Chinese people and Asian people around the country, don't you know, even if it means covering up for them, the Democrats are all about one thing only, and that is not making the black kids angry.